Mom, you're scary. But you're the best. Yeah, let's do that. We need to get rid of the pests as soon as possible. Unaware that I could hear them, Carl and my mother-in-law Molly were making a terrifying plan. A pregnancy I had longed for from the bottom of my heart. But it seemed Carl and Molly didn't want the baby. A pain gnawed at my stomach. It felt like the baby inside me was screaming in anguish. What can I do to protect this child? Thinking that way, I decided to approach Carl gently without provoking him. That way, both Carl and Molly would continue to be kind to me. I decided to avoid pointless conflicts and keep things peaceful. Until the moment when our quiet family time would be shattered. I am Charlotte, 38 years old. We've been married for about 2 years, but we still don't have children. Considering my age, I'm starting to feel a little anxious. It's okay. Children are a gift, so let's wait for the right time. Even if we don't have kids, as long as I have you, Charlotte, I'm happy. Yeah, you're right. Thanks, Carl. My husband Carl always stands by me with kind words. But the fact that we haven't had children yet is partly due to our living situation. It's been 2 months since I last saw Carl. Since the month after we got married, Carl has been working on an assignment in a city that's a plane ride away. We haven't seen each other much lately. I'm so happy you came to see me after so long. Well, it's work, so there's nothing we can do. In the early days of his assignment, we visited each other every 2 weeks. Gradually, it became once a month, which seemed reasonable considering the distance. Still, only seeing each other once a month during our newlywed period made me feel lonely. Has work been busy lately? Yeah, kind of. Sorry for the inconvenience, Charlotte. But I love this job and I'm proud of it. Carl, dedicated to his work, is amazing. He doesn't get time off, nor is he paid enough for it, yet he never complains about his job and says with pride, "It's work I love." I don't have that kind of passion for my own job. So I respected his feelings and even admired him for it. Hey, maybe I should come with you to where you are. What? Only seeing each other about once a month is what keeps us feeling like newlyweds. But at the same time, the loneliness of being apart is overwhelming. No, that's not a good idea. Carl rejected the idea flatly. Usually, he speaks calmly, but his voice became fast and urgent. If you come to where I am, what about your job? I can't let you quit, Charlotte. I'll find a job over there too. Before I could finish, Carl shot down the idea. No, don't say it so easily. Do you really think a woman nearing 40 can find a new job that easily? You've never even went through a proper job hunt. You're talking crazy. I'm honestly shocked at how naive you sound. Working isn't that easy. After his outburst, Carl took a deep breath. He cleared his throat, seemingly to calm himself after his outburst. Look, what I mean is, it's not a good idea for you to leave the great job you have now. But I've been away for over a year now, and I'll probably be transferred again soon. We can think about living together then. Sensing my anxiety, Carl gently embraced me. I'm also holding back my loneliness. Let's get through this together. It's going to be okay. Even if we're far apart, our hearts are still connected, right? I couldn't bring myself to say yes. I was scared by Carl's harsh words just now. But I had been harboring some dissatisfaction long before that. Carl would only stay one night at my apartment and then return to his post the next morning. When I went to see him off at the airport, Carl hugged me without worrying about who was watching. I'll be back soon. I love you. Before I could even savor the moment, Carl extended his right hand. Ticket. Yeah. Here's your plane ticket. Take care. Thanks. Carl took the ticket from me and disappeared into the crowd. My dissatisfaction is about money. I pay for Carl's round-trip plane tickets every month so he can come to see me. On top of that, I give him money for the taxi from the airport to his apartment. Carl can't cook, so he buys takeout or supermarket meals at his post. So, I also give him money for living expenses every month. I feel like a parent supporting a college student living on their own. After muttering to myself, I rethink it. Carl was feeling lonely too. I'm not the only one feeling anxious. Carl is working hard alone in an unfamiliar place. When Carl gets transferred next time, I'll definitely go with him. Maybe I should study for a qualification so I can work anywhere. Instead of complaining, I should take action. I immediately stopped by a bookstore and picked up a few certification books when my smartphone rang. It was a message from Carl. We had just parted, but he already sent me a text. He's probably on the plane now. Maybe he's feeling lonely. By the way, I forgot to mention, but this month, could you send an extra $200 for my mom? It's her birthday. I smiled as I read the text, but it wasn't what I had hoped for. The certification books I had in my hand suddenly felt heavy, and I put them back on the shelf. My mother-in-law, Molly, lives in the neighboring city, so I can visit her easily, but we don't see each other much. Still, I send her money every month. About half a year after Carl and I got married, Molly lost her long-term part-time job, leaving her in a tough spot. My father-in-law had already passed away, so Molly lives alone. I'm so sorry to trouble you right after you got married, Charlotte. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Molly had tears in her eyes as she stroked my hand. Even now, every time I send money, she calls to thank me. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you, Charlotte. It's getting chilly in the mornings and evenings these days, but you're not catching a cold, are you? If you ever feel unwell or need anything, just let me know. I'd come to you right away. I think of you like my own daughter. She is a very kind mother-in-law. When Carl and I visited her house at the end of the year, she prepared a feast and welcomed us warmly. So, I have no complaints about increasing the remittance for her birthday. But I had my birthday last month too. When we were dating, Carl used to take me out for a nice dinner to celebrate. But since we got married, all I get is a happy birthday text. This year, he didn't even send that. I understand if he was busy and forgot, but it hurts to know that he remembered Molly's birthday so clearly. The fog in my heart thickens. The fog in my heart thickens. Some of my coworkers and friends have said they're envious of my husband being away on assignment. They think it must be nice and easy. When he decided to take on a solo assignment, I didn't think much of it. But it turns out I'm the type who gets lonely easily when left alone. The loneliness, and even the financial worries, would all disappear if we lived together. As I imagined a future living with Carl, it was as if my wish was heard by some higher power, and a turning point came into my life. I had been feeling a bit off lately, and on a whim, I checked. To my surprise, it was exactly what I thought. I was pregnant. Standing in the bathroom, looking at the test results, I raised both hands in triumph. Carl is going to be so happy. He's going to be so surprised. Yeah, I should make this an even bigger surprise. I felt like a little kid, my heart dancing with excitement. I decided I would surprise him by visiting him and sharing the news in person. I quickly called Carl. Carl, it's a Saturday, but do you work tomorrow? Yeah, I do. It's not unusual for us to work weekends. Oh, I wish we had the same days off, Charlotte. Then we could meet every week. I miss you. I want to see you soon. I agreed, telling him I missed him too, but inside I was smiling. I could barely contain myself. I wanted to say, I'm coming to surprise you tomorrow, so badly. I also wanted to shout, Carl, you're going to be a dad. But I hid those feelings and kept the conversation light, not giving anything away, before ending the call. The next day, I caught a flight in the afternoon, heading toward the place where Carl was living. By the evening, I found myself standing in front of his apartment, looking up at the lit window. I hadn't expected him to be home yet, but it was Saturday, so maybe he got off early. I rang the doorbell. No matter how hard I tried to stay calm, I couldn't stop the smile from forming on my face. I fixed my bangs and waited for Carl to answer the door. Yes? Who is it? The door opened, and there stood a man I didn't know. He had a scruffy beard and was wearing clothes that looked tired and worn. It definitely wasn't Carl. I stood frozen, still smiling. Is Carl? No. The man replied bluntly. I couldn't stop smiling, even as the door closed in front of me. Still smiling, I thought to myself, did I get the wrong apartment? It had been about 2 years since I had last been here, so I wasn't entirely sure of my memory. Usually, Carl would come to my place because it was more convenient. When I did visit, we'd stay at a hotel together. When I asked around, the other tenants told me there was no one named Carl living in that apartment. What's going on? Feeling uneasy, I called Carl. Where are you right now? Just got off work and I'm at home. Man, I'm exhausted. Carl's voice sounded as usual. At home? You mean the apartment near the airport, right? You know, the one that's a 40-minute walk from the airport, with a light green exterior. And there's only a few houses and a vending machine nearby. Yeah, that's the one. It's super inconvenient, but I'm doing my best. Carl laughed. But here I was, standing in front of that exact apartment building. Where could he possibly be in this place? This rural part of town had no other apartment buildings nearby that I could have mistaken for his. I couldn't manage a real smile. Instead, only the corner of my mouth turned up slightly. Hey, so. I'm pregnant. I was delivering such happy news, but for some reason, my throat felt tight. Carl didn't respond for what felt like an eternity. What? When he finally spoke, his voice was low. No way, really? There was no expectation in his voice at all. The tone dropped at the end, as if he was asking in disbelief. It's true. The test came back positive, and I went to the doctor first thing this morning. I tried to say it brightly, but Carl let out a heavy sigh. What? Now? Why? Did we mess up with the protection? What the hell were you thinking? This is just a problem for me. Not only was he not happy, he seemed outright annoyed. Seriously, we don't even live together. Raising a kid like this is impossible. I mean, we only see each other once a month. How do you even get pregnant from that? You're almost 40. It just sounds so fake. It can't be real. Carl's irritated voice started to fade away. Before I knew it, my hand, holding the smartphone, dropped to my side. At some point, the call had ended. I didn't feel like facing Carl anymore, so I took the next flight home. My surprise pregnancy announcement had ended in a complete disaster. I was the only one excited about the baby. I walked slowly from the airport to my apartment. As I entered the apartment entrance, my slouched back straightened up. Carl was there. Carl? Why are you here? After that call, I rushed to catch a flight. I'm sorry for earlier. It was such a sudden shock, and I wasn't thinking clearly. As he apologized, Carl pulled me into a tight embrace. I'm so happy to be having a child with you, Charlotte. Thank you. I'm really happy. We were supposed to be celebrating together, but I couldn't feel that way anymore. Even in Carl's warm embrace, I felt frozen. That night, Carl stayed over at my place. Do you think it's a boy? Or a girl? I can't wait to find out. Carl kept expressing his joy, and I forced a smile. The kind, usual Carl and the Carl who snapped about the failed contraception. Which one am I supposed to believe? Feeling uneasy about approaching him lounging in bed. I'll go to the grocery store and pick up something for breakfast tomorrow. I fled. Sure. And grab some beer and snacks while you're at it. I'm feeling a bit hungry. It was 10 p.m. His casual reply, with no consideration for my feelings, annoyed me more than it should have, probably because I was on edge from the pregnancy. I wasn't even feeling any morning sickness yet, nor was my belly showing, but my body felt sluggish and walking was a chore. I said I was going to the grocery store, but instead, I stood in the kitchen, sipping water and sighing constantly. It was getting late, and I was about to head out when I heard a voice coming from the next room. Carl should have been in bed watching TV. Yeah, seriously. She says she's pregnant. He was talking to someone on the phone. It was still early in the pregnancy. We didn't even know if everything would turn out okay, yet he was already spreading the news. This is just ridiculous. I can't deal with this. Already feeling uncomfortable, my heart started pounding even harder. Nervously, I approached the bedroom and peeked in through the open door. Carl was lying on my bed, picking his nose. I'd never seen him so completely relaxed, in such a careless state. Mom, you don't even want a grandkid from her, right? The person seems to be Molly. If it's Molly, who always cares for me so kindly, she'll surely reprimand Carl for his abusive words. I'm glad we agree. I mean, seriously, who would want a baby with her? Why did she have to get pregnant? It's expensive even to get rid of it. I couldn't believe my ears. Is that really Molly? Did Molly also agree that my child is unnecessary? Huh? Yeah. What? You're insane. Who even thinks of something like that? That's just awful. You're such a villain. From that conversation, pieces of Molly's terrifying idea start to emerge. You're scary. But you're the best. Yeah, let's do that. It's better if we deal with pests early, right? A pain tightens in my stomach. It feels like the baby inside me is screaming. Encountering Carl and Molly's true, shocking nature has left my mind spinning. But the pain in my stomach reminds me this is all real. Trying not to let Carl, who is happily on the phone, notice, I slip out of the house. Carl probably thinks I've already gone to the grocery store. There's no way I could calmly come back home, holding prepared food and beer, after hearing such a terrifying plan. My steps turn not toward the grocery store, but the police station. Even late at night, the neighborhood police station has officers on duty, and I feel relieved. Out of breath, I rushed in and they kindly listened to my story. But their response was far from what I had hoped for. Nothing has actually happened yet, right? How about talking it over with your family first? If you're still worried, feel free to come back anytime. It seems they won't prevent an incident from happening before it starts. Leaving the police station, even the tears that had been welling up dried in despair. I rub my still aching stomach and steel myself. I'm home. After that, I bought the prepared food and beer at the grocery store and cheerfully returned home. I realized I couldn't rely on the police, so I chose to treat Carl kindly without provoking him. I'd spent so much time outside that it was already past 11 p.m. Carl was still awake, waiting for me to return. "Oh, thanks for the beer." "Well, let's drink it right away." "Cheers, cheers!" Matching Carl's cheerful mood, I patted his back. "Wait, what's the toast for?" "It's for the baby, right?" "I can't drink because I'm pregnant." "Oh, yeah, but your belly isn't even showing yet, so it should be fine to drink a little, right?" "Come on, let's celebrate together." I gently stroked Carl's head as he snuggled up to me. "You drink a lot instead." "Even if my belly isn't showing yet, I'm already a mom." "Here, have another beer." Encouraged by me, Carl continued drinking beer. He seemed to drink more than usual, probably because it was a celebration. "You can't wait, can you?" "Yeah, I can't wait." When I asked, Carl smiled with his flushed cheeks. After finishing his fourth beer, Carl happily drifted off to sleep. The following weekend, Carl came to see me again for the second week in a row. With Molly joining us, we spent a lively time together at my apartment. "Charlotte, you sit down. I'll be the one cooking today, so leave it to me." "Thank you. I'm looking forward to it since your food is always delicious." Molly didn't mention my pregnancy at all and, as usual, kindly didn't ask me to do anything. Mother-in-law and daughter-in-law conflict was always someone else's business. We spent time peacefully and reached mealtime. Various dishes that Molly was good at were lined up on the table. "Molly, just as I expected. Everything looks delicious." The three of us said, "Let's eat together" in unison. We gathered around the warm food, a family united. It was pure happiness. Now, I took a knife and cut into the chicken and tomato stew that Molly had painstakingly made. The inside of the chicken was a beautiful pink color, possibly because it had been well simmered in tomato sauce. The meat is so tender. When I cook it, it tends to get a bit tough, so I'd love to learn how you make it, Molly. "Thank you. The key is controlling the heat." "Come on, Charlotte, eat plenty." "Okay." I replied cheerfully, but instead of eating the chicken, I reached for another dish. Even from a distance, the steak sauce had a strong scent of alcohol. It seemed to have a very grown-up flavor. "Oh, that's a big steak. Looks delicious." "It's delicious. All the flavor is packed in, so make sure to drink the sauce too." "Okay." I answered, but still didn't eat it. There were so many other dishes that caught my attention. "Molly, what's this dish?" I pointed to what looked like a pumpkin salad. Molly smiled at me as I tilted my head. "It's pumpkin salad. Remember when I made it for you before, Charlotte? You kept saying how delicious it was and ate so much. I made it with love again, so eat plenty. Here, especially for you, Charlotte, a big portion." "Wow, that's a huge serving." "Thank you, Molly." I held up the pumpkin salad with both hands, my eyes sparkling. Then I noticed something. "Huh? Molly, is there a special secret ingredient in this?" "Huh?" Although it was just a normal conversation, Molly's voice cracked. Feeling curious, I continued. "Look, what are these small orange and white specks mixed into the pumpkin? Is it salt? Pepper? Spices?" "Oh, well, it's salt. A rare salt from the sea." "I see." Before taking a bite, I enjoyed the conversation with Molly. Even though it was just an ordinary family moment, I noticed that Molly occasionally furrowed her brow slightly as she smiled. She seemed a little upset, but why? Anyway, just eat it. I put my heart into making this delicious meal, and I want you to taste it." Molly strongly urged me, and I let out a small sigh. The truth is, I quietly put down the fork I was holding and looked into Molly's eyes. I could hear Molly swallow. The truth is, I'm pregnant. Molly's eyes widened in surprise at the sudden confession. Oh. After reacting as if she had already known, she exaggeratedly raised her voice. Oh, you're having a baby. Wow, how surprising. Ignoring Molly's monotone line. Sorry. I apologized. I'm happy about the pregnancy, but I haven't been feeling well lately. My chest feels tight, and I can't really eat. I looked at the feast laid out in front of me. I felt sorry that I couldn't eat the food that Molly had supposedly poured her love into. But even if you're feeling unwell, you should still eat something. Come on, I made all this food, so at least have a bite. You're right. I stabbed a piece of the tender pink chicken with my fork. All right, here, Carl. I brought the chicken closer to Carl's mouth. Instinctively, Carl opened his mouth. Hey! Wait, Charlotte! What are you doing? Why are you giving that to Carl? I stood there, stunned, my lips slightly pursed, watching Molly and Carl, who both looked inexplicably pale. Why, you ask? Well, it would have been a waste if no one ate what you worked so hard to make. So, I thought Carl could have it instead. Look, Carl, one more bite. Carl's face twisted in discomfort, but I smiled brightly and brought another bite to his mouth. Stop! Carl's breath was heavy, his hand clutched at his throat. My cheeks flushed pink, like raw chicken. I teased Carl's closed lips with the forkful of meat. Are you embarrassed, Carl? This feels almost like something a couple would do. It's kind of embarrassing, isn't it? But, once the baby comes, we might not get a chance to do something like this anymore. So, let's make the most of it while we can. Here, Carl, have some more. I sweetened my words, adding a heart at the end of my sentence, pressing him to take the bite. With force, I pushed the chicken into his tightly closed lips, making sure it got through. Molly's cooking is delicious, right? I made sure Carl knew that there was no way he could spit out Molly's lovingly prepared meal. Tears welled up in Carl's eyes as he swallowed the chicken, barely chewing. Come to think of it, why was the chicken in my tomato stew such a pretty pink color? At first, I thought it was just the tomatoes, but now it felt like something was off. Oh well, I shrugged it off. Carl chugged down milk desperately, while Molly rubbed his back. Molly shot me a sharp look, but I simply smiled back. About an hour later, my own stomach started growling. I hadn't really eaten anything myself. But I didn't have the courage to eat the meal Molly made, filled with what could only be described as something like her affection. So I decided to head to the grocery store. Both Carl and Molly, who had been tense during the meal, kindly saw me off when I told them I was leaving. Be careful, you've got a baby in there. Even when you're pregnant, light exercise is important. Take it easy and be safe. I was thankful for their concern, slipped on my sneakers, and headed out the door. When I reached the elevator and rode it down to the first floor, I saw the entrance had about 6 steps. Right before the stairs, I twirled around almost playfully. And then, out of nowhere, Molly suddenly appeared behind me, rushing past in a blur. Huh? Molly? We made eye contact for just a split second. Molly didn't land her feet on any of the stairs. Instead, she plummeted straight to the ground, like a failed airplane crashing down. There were only 6 steps, and some energetic kids might jump down them. But a face-first dive? That was something else. Molly sure was bold. Oh no, Molly! Are you okay? I called out in panic, and almost immediately, Carl came rushing over too. Mom! Mom! Molly was still on the ground, convulsing, and Carl was losing it. I knew I had to keep it together, so I grabbed my smartphone and dialed emergency services. "Is this an emergency or an accident?" Without hesitation, I answered clearly. "It's an emergency." And with barely a breath in between, I continued. "Someone is trying to kill my unborn baby." Saying the words made the overwhelming fear sink in all at once. This is the reality. Their horrifying plan was put into action. "Please help me. If this goes on, I don't know what will happen to the baby, or to me." I had told them someone was injured, so the police and ambulance would surely be here soon. Carl, who had been shaken by Molly's faceplant earlier, seemed to be taken aback by the phone call I had just made. "Who did you call?" "The police." "What?" I replied coldly, sensing both irritation and panic from Carl. "You and Molly, I could feel the hatred from you both. What are you planning to do to me and my unborn baby?" Molly, shaking with pain, began to explode with rage. Her body seemed too hurt to move, but I could feel her determination, like she would crawl over to attack me. Even if she had to turn into a zombie to do it. Her voice shattered the air, like it might break the glass around us. "Don't you dare! What do you think I've done to deserve this? After everything you've put me through, how can you even say that?" I calmly met her furious eyes and asked, "Molly, didn't you try to push me?" "I felt your hand press against my back, so I quickly dodged." "Ugh. A pregnant woman shouldn't be dodging." It was hard to believe these cruel words were coming from the usually kind and gentle Molly. "I apologize for dodging while pregnant. But I'm still early in my pregnancy, so my belly isn't that heavy yet. I can still move faster than an older person like you, Molly." As I taunted her, Molly lost control, going absolutely berserk. The angrier they got, the more I felt laughter bubbling inside me. I had to fight the urge to laugh out loud, instead flashing them a warm smile. "My pregnancy really bothered you, didn't it? I overheard Carl talking to you on the phone last week. You were planning to stage an accident because terminating the pregnancy would cost too much." "I know everything." Carl and Molly froze, completely caught off guard. "Too bad." Their stunned faces were lined up next to each other, and it was hilarious. I could hardly contain myself. Now, over the past week, I'd also figured out why my pregnancy was such an inconvenience to them. "Hey Molly, didn't you want to hold your precious grandchild? People always say a grandchild is the most cherished thing. Or, perhaps, one grandchild is enough for you." Molly didn't speak, but her shoulders twitched. Could that be a yes? "I see. You already have your first grandchild. Are you not interested in a second one?" Carl is an only child. We haven't had a child together yet. So that first grandchild must belong to his affair partner. "Hey Carl, you've been by my side this whole time, haven't you?" And as it turns out, Carl wasn't working away from home like he claimed. "You've rented an apartment in the same city where Molly lives, right? It's just next door. That's pretty close. And you're living there with her and the kids, all three of you together. Carl's place isn't far at all, not like it's a plane ride away." I pushed the words at Carl, who was so flustered he couldn't even come up with a rebuttal. "Oh? Then why did you always make me buy you plane tickets?" "Ah, I get it. You never flew, you just refunded them." On top of his allowance, he'd been pocketing the airfare, too. And to make matters worse, he'd been sending money to Molly. I had become their personal ATM for nearly 2 years, all while they pretended to be kind and caring. When the truth finally came out, Molly was the first to break her calm. "See? I told you to marry an older woman. She glared at me, spitting venomous words. This is what happens when you marry a wife who's still half able to have kids. If you just quietly handed over the money, we could have been nice to you. But no, you had to act like his wife. How shameless. It was as if I was the villain who had ruined their peaceful lives. Even Carl was disappointed, burying his face in his hands. I mean, if I had to pretend we were married, I didn't want it to be with an old, gross woman. Late 30s was my limit. Ugh. I really screwed up. Instead of reflecting on their own actions, they only lamented how their plan had failed. All right, fine. I'll break up with the other woman. If I had to pick, I guess it'd be Charlotte anyway. Sorry about everything. It made me even angrier that he thought he was in any position to choose how to live going forward. What? This woman? I think Bonnie's the better choice. Of course, Molly wasn't going to pick me. Bonnie was the younger woman he'd been cheating with. No, Mom, don't get involved. I want Charlotte. I shrugged my shoulders and said, yeah, I guess if you're thinking about the future, I'm the better choice over sweet little Bonnie. I mean, after all, you could be the next CEO, right? That's when Molly finally remembered my real worth. My dad runs the company, and I work there, too. When Dad retires, Carl might have a shot at the CEO position. Oh, right. Molly's tone suddenly brightened. But before they could fool me again with their fake kindness, I made my declaration. Don't get too excited. Carl is never going to be the CEO. We're getting divorced. What? You can't say that. It disgusted me that this man, who had scammed me and built another family behind my back, was now trying to worm his way in. Besides, my dad had no intention of ever passing the business to Carl. It was all just in Carl's head. Come on, think it over, okay? You're pregnant with Carl's child, right? You can't just get a divorce. It wouldn't be fair to the child. I might have listened to an apology. But I wasn't about to let them use a child as leverage. A bad dad isn't needed. Just as I firmly rejected them, the police and paramedics finally arrived. I pointed at Molly, who had collapsed like she was the victim, and explained the facts. She tried to hurt me but failed, and then fell and injured herself. As Molly screamed, I added, "Check the security cameras." She pointed towards the camera. No, it's not what it seems. I just wanted to surprise my daughter-in-law, that's all. I came up behind her and called out, thinking it'd be a fun little prank. We're close like that, so I didn't think much of it. Molly began making excuses, her voice shaky but insistent. Even if she managed to play off pushing me down the stairs as an accident, how could she explain what she did with the food? And I have reason to believe the food was tampered with as well. It should still be in the room, so can you check it out? No. Before the police could respond, Molly shouted, panic overtaking her voice. Just as Carl rushed towards the room, likely aiming to destroy evidence, the police restrained him. As they pushed his shoulders down, I leaned in close enough to see his face twist in pain. You don't need to be in such a hurry to destroy the evidence, Carl. Even if you get rid of the food, there's still the video footage. What? I have cameras, you know. One in the kitchen, one in the living room, and another in the bedroom. It's a crazy world out there, so I installed them just in case. Carl fell to the floor in shock, his eyes wide with disbelief. Even if they destroyed the food, it was too late now. I was already watching the footage live from my smartphone. The chicken tomato stew that they prepared for me. They barely cooked the chicken, just searing it before covering it with tomato sauce. The steak was drenched in whiskey, far too much to be edible. And the hidden ingredient in my pumpkin salad? An absurd amount of cold medicine. I had watched Molly and Carl in the kitchen, side by side, carefully opening up capsules and mixing them into my food as if it were nothing. Had I eaten any of it, it could have harmed my unborn baby. It wouldn't have killed me, but their actions were vile, beyond forgiveness. Knowing they had been caught, Carl grabbed onto my waist and begged. "I'm sorry, Charlotte. It was all my fault. Please, forgive me." "Yes, Carl, it was your fault. And now that you understand that, you need to accept the consequences." His face turned pale, his hope fading from his eyes as he stood frozen in place. Then, suddenly, he bolted for the door, attempting to run. "You're not leaving me!" Molly, who had collapsed on the floor, reached out and grabbed Carl's ankle, causing him to trip dramatically. As Carl tumbled to the ground, Molly screamed at him in a fit of rage. "How dare you try to run by yourself? This is all your fault for getting involved with this sneaky woman in the first place. You couldn't even control her, and now look what you've done. Getting her pregnant? You idiot!" Molly kept screaming, her voice full of venom, while Carl kicked her in the head in frustration. The commotion grew louder, and the police forcefully separated the two, dragging them away in handcuffs. Later, both Molly and Carl were charged with attempted assault for their malicious actions against me. But because I had avoided harm, they were only charged with an attempt, leading to a reduced sentence. In the end, they received a strict warning, though being surrounded by those strong police officers had clearly left an impact. When they were released, they looked exhausted, their eyes glazed over, like people who had lost all hope. A few days later, I had no choice but to meet them again to get Carl to sign the divorce papers. When I saw him, he looked like he had aged 10 years overnight. "This is all your fault." He was still blaming me? I listened in disbelief and let his words pass over me. No matter how much pain he was in, it was all his own doing. "I've been through hell. Are you happy now?" Apparently, Carl had food poisoning and truly went through hell. It was that special chicken he had prepared for me. He said he lost all the fluids in his body, both ways. He writhed in agony, suffered from a high fever, and even passed out. Raw chicken is really dangerous, huh? I'll be more careful too. I had no reason to offer him any words of sympathy. I got his signature on the divorce papers and quickly left him behind. Unfortunately, his personal hell wasn't over yet. A few weeks later, Carl barged into my place, shouting, "Was this your doing?" "What are you talking about?" I played dumb, but I knew exactly what he meant. I had reported his girlfriend for fraud. She had been getting all sorts of money from the government, money she wasn't supposed to get with Carl supporting her. "We aren't getting any more money. And now there's this fine? They're threatening us with a huge amount. What am I supposed to do? What are we supposed to do?" He had been doing shady things, so he was just paying the price for it. With no money coming in from the government or from me, their life was going to crumble. Maybe try working honestly? That's the only advice I had for him. Carl, who had always depended on other people's money and drifted through life, now had to work for real, but I wasn't sure if he could. Instead of building a simple, happy life with someone he loved, Carl had chosen an easy, convenient life. He thought he'd become a CEO one day and that life was a breeze. Now, it was time to pay for all the laziness. By the way, I'll be asking for child support and alimony from you too. What? Life wasn't going to be as easy as he thought. A divorce alone wasn't going to get him out of this. On a side note, Molly's life was pretty much ruined too. She hurt her arm when she fell down the stairs and told everyone it was her daughter-in-law's fault. She also had a huge scar on her face, which had initially earned her some sympathy. But as people started noticing how bizarre her behavior was, doubts began to rise. Soon enough, rumors spread that she had tried to harm her daughter-in-law and grandchild. And now people in town avoid her like the plague. The only ones who dare approach her are fearless children, who, instead of showing pity, chase her around like she's a ghost story come to life. Because she had tried so hard to paint me as the villain. Her story only drew more attention. Molly, too, was paying for her own actions. I had lost both Carl and Molly, people I had once loved and trusted. They had betrayed me terribly, but there had been kind moments, too. So, to say I wasn't hurt at all by everything that happened would be a lie. But that last bit of affection I stubbornly held onto for Carl disappeared in an instant. A few months after the divorce, I gave birth to my child, and a new family was born. So sweet! My baby, so small and soft, my precious one. When I held out my finger, the baby grasped it. I never wanted to let go of that tiny hand. And after the birth, my parents, relatives, friends, and even coworkers came to support me, reminding me that I had always been surrounded by people who cared. Beyond the small world I had shared with Carl and Molly, I had always had places of love and support. My baby would grow up loved by kind, generous people. Let's be happy together. When a mom has someone to protect, she becomes strong. I decided to walk a path my child could be proud of. I had just remarried a younger man, Tarek, and we were setting up our new home together. I was looking forward to starting a fun life together, just the two of us, when suddenly, an unexpected turn of events occurred. Kent and Alyssa are moving in with us. I couldn't believe my ears when Tarek told me this. He was planning to let his son, Kent, from his previous marriage, and Kent's wife, Alyssa, live in the house I had bought. Isn't it wonderful to have a bigger family? Alyssa's unabashed words made me furious. And then, on the day they were supposed to move in, I got a call from a furious Alyssa. "Oh, you found out already?" I couldn't help but smile like a witch. The truth was, I never intended to live with them from the start. My name is Misty, I'm 51 years old. I met Tarek, who is 8 years younger than me, 2 years ago, and we got married quickly after about 6 months of dating. Getting married to a younger man after turning 50 would have attracted all kinds of criticism back in the day, but there was a reason for it. That's because my first marriage was arranged through an acquaintance. The family of my ex-husband, Sterling, was wealthy, and Sterling, who was born into affluence, might have looked plain but was a gentle and kind person. "From now on, I'll work outside, so you can relax at home," he said. True to his word, I quit my job and became a housewife. Fortunately, before I could start feeling bored, we were blessed with a daughter, Kelly, a year into our marriage, and I found myself in a relatively happy family life. But that life didn't last long. 8 years into our marriage, Sterling died in a car accident. The shock of suddenly losing my partner and the anxiety of having to raise Kelly alone darkened my life in an instant. However, luckily, Sterling had left behind a fortune, so I didn't struggle financially. And Kelly, being a kind and sensible child, was considerate of me, making child-rearing not too difficult. Despite being hit by misfortune suddenly, I now think I've lived a relatively blessed life, with Kelly growing up well. Still, there were times when I pondered the possibilities of another life. If I had declined the acquaintance's introduction back then, would my life have been completely different? But it was pointless to think about what-ifs now. I had to accept my situation and move on. After Sterling passed away, while raising Kelly, I started working as a writer for cooking magazines from home. An old boss from the publishing company I used to work for had offered me the job. Working from home meant less hassle, but it also meant fewer opportunities to meet new people. In that manner, I settled into a monotonous life consumed by work and parenting. Even after Kelly moved out and became independent, nothing changed. I would wake up at the same time every day, work, occasionally have meetings, eat the meals I prepared myself in between, work some more, then sleep. Amidst these repetitive days, I met Tarek, a freelance photographer, through an editor of a magazine. Over 40 and younger than me, he was a stylish and handsome man. Both of us had been married before. I had a distinguished 28-year-old daughter, and he had an adult son who was about to get married. Let's enjoy our second life without taking things too seriously, Tarek suggested, and I decided to marry him without overthinking it. He was completely different from Sterling, and I found his lightheartedness refreshing. Tarek was immediately friendly, and he knew all about stylish shops and lively places I was unfamiliar with. Absorbing new things from him felt like I was reclaiming the time that had passed. Wanting to do something for him in return, I invited him over to my house and treated him to my best homemade dishes. I don't know if you'll like it, but I enjoy cooking. It's really delicious. If I'm going to marry, it has to be to a woman who's good at cooking. Being praised for my cooking made me very happy. For you, I'd make delicious meals every day. Really? Then I'll take you up on that every day. And so, our married life began with Tarek coming to live in my house. However, once we started living together as a couple, some concerns emerged. Of course, I was prepared for some discomfort since two people living together would inevitably have differences. Lately, you haven't talked much about your work. Is there something worrying you? I tried to subtly inquire about his work. Then, lounging on the sofa, Tarek answered, Actually, I'm on a break right now. There are various reasons, but don't worry, I'm getting financial support from my parents. It seemed Tarek was almost unemployed. But since we weren't in a relationship with plans to have and raise children, I decided not to pry further into his private life. I wanted our second life to be free from domestic encumbrances, living more like lovers than anything else. Several months passed since Tarek and I started living together. Then, suddenly, he said he wanted to move. My current apartment was located in a suburb, over an hour's drive from downtown. After losing Sterling, I moved here seeking a better environment to raise Kelly, and I've lived here ever since. Compared to downtown, it was safer and blessed with nature, making it a comfortable place for people of all ages, and I liked it. If we live in a place with so many old people, you'll become an old woman soon, he joked. His words stuck with me, but I laughed it off, thinking getting angry would mean admitting I was an old woman. Then, where do you want to live, Tarek? Somewhere within 10 minutes of downtown would be nice. But wouldn't that be a bit too noisy? Don't worry, home is where the heart is, as they say. When it comes to living, convenience is the most important. Feeling a bit uneasy about his desire for convenience despite not working, I thought perhaps this town didn't suit Tarek's vibe after all. Living in his preferred location might make him more positive about work. Besides, the stylish vibe he had when we met had faded recently. For his sake, I decided to listen to Tarek's wishes. From that day on, I started looking for a house where Tarek and I could live together. However, using the inheritance from Sterling for Tarek's sake made me feel guilty. After much deliberation, I ended up calling Kelly for advice. As I mentioned earlier, she had already become independent and was now working abroad. Kelly, who was once a girl I felt needed my protection after Sterling's death, had grown into a sharp, business-minded woman. Expecting her to disapprove, I was surprised by her indifferent response. The inheritance Dad left is yours, Mom, and I've moved out, so you shouldn't worry about it. As much as I was proud of her for becoming an independent woman, her words felt somewhat distant. It was the same when I remarried. She only said, "Congratulations," without asking about my partner. However, if being happy about her independence is what's expected, then perhaps it's me who hasn't learned to let go. Understood, Kelly. I've decided to live my own life, I declared firmly. Just don't have any regrets, Mom. With those words, Kelly hung up the phone. Not having regrets. That phrase felt like a thorn in my heart. Following that, Tarek and I continued to look at various properties. Watching him happily inspect each one made me happy too. However, the newly built detached house with gardens in his preferred area were far too expensive. In the end, I had to ask Tarek to compromise, and a friend recommended a reasonably nice, used property. 20 minutes from downtown. Well, it's better than living in a town like a nursing home before, so it's fine. Tarek's words were laced with sarcasm. Although he didn't mean any harm, his remarks have increasingly bothered me. Perhaps my romantic feelings for him had faded. This thought suddenly filled me with insecurity. Tarek, do you love me? I blurted out a question that seemed childish. I knew it wasn't something a woman over 50 should ask. But the fear of losing my current happiness made me say it. Hearing my anxious question, Tarek suddenly looked at me kindly. What are you talking about? I married you because I love you. Besides, Misty, you're the best partner I've ever had. Whether it was a lie or truth, those words reassured me once again. Having decided to live with Tarek, I had to trust him more than anyone else. And so, we set up a new home close to downtown. Living in a house wasn't bad at all once we settled in. We could grow a few vegetables in the garden, and planting flowers made the whole house brighter. If it was just the two of us in a carefree life, I didn't mind where we were. That was what I thought until Tarek suggested something outrageous. Living close to downtown really is convenient, isn't it? But don't you think this house is too big for just the two of us? I couldn't help but ask. What do you mean? If we live in a big house just by ourselves, it'll become dreary. But, Tarek, you were the one who wanted a detached house. Yeah, that's why I thought it would be good if we all lived together. So, in about 3 weeks. Tarek hesitated. Kent and Alyssa are moving in. He said it with an innocent smile. Kent and Alyssa, as in from your ex-wife? He had a son named Kent from his previous marriage, but after the divorce, the ex-wife took custody and raised him back in her hometown. Now, he's an adult and recently got married. If I recall correctly, Kent's wife was named Alyssa. They want to live in the city. It seems like young people from the countryside always dream of city life. I've never really done anything father-like, so I at least want to fulfill Kent's wish. Hearing Tarek talk so lightly, I became deeply suspicious. Could it be that marrying me and getting me to buy a house was his goal all along? If he never loved me and was only after my assets, then the moment the house was bought, I would become unnecessary, right? That thought brought on an unprecedented panic. There had already been times when he wouldn't come home for days without contact, or he would just read my messages and ignore them. I had suspected there might be another woman. But since he always came back home, I told myself that he just had his own social life. However, I couldn't just sit back and ignore this situation. What are you talking about, Tarek? It's out of the question. This house was bought for the two of us to live in. I retorted angrily, and he responded with a smirk. Why are you so mad? I'm not talking about bringing in strangers. It's just living with my son. If you love me, you'll come to love Kent too. I don't know them, and I've never even met them. Then it's about time you got to know them. Everyone is a stranger at first. Plus, my daughter-in-law Lissa is a nice girl. Think of her as your daughter. Misty, you've been lonely ever since Kelly left, haven't you? My anger reached its peak. What infuriated me the most was that Tarek thought of me as a lonely woman. Left? Kelly became independent and flew the nest. I wasn't lonely, I was happy for her. Don't presume to know my feelings. Even as I shouted in earnest, Tarek remained unfazed. He must be accustomed to disputes with women. But you must have been lonely after losing your ex-husband and Kelly moving out. That's why you remarried at your age. It's better to admit you're feeling lonely. A home should be filled with family, bustling with life. Tarek said this with a constant smile, leaving me at a loss for words. Perhaps there was a part of me that felt lonely. After losing Sterling and raising Kelly on my own, my life felt out of focus. Maybe I had hoped for a love that would bring clarity back into my life. I took a moment to gather my thoughts before saying, I understand what you're saying. But I'd at least like to get to know Kent and his wife before we all live together. Could you give me their contact information? Tarek, looking pleased as if asking really, then made a phone call. Hello, Alyssa? Misty says it's okay. And she wants to get to know everyone better before we all start living together. Tarek called Alyssa first, not Kent. Probably because the power dynamic favored his daughter-in-law over his son. The enthusiasm I once had vanished, replaced by a calmness that led to a completely opposite scenario in my mind. I wanted to close the distance between us as much as possible before they moved in, to maximize the impact of their arrival. I resolved to make them regret taking a single woman like me lightly. From that day on, I exchanged messages with Alyssa daily. It seemed Alyssa was the one particularly keen on living in the city. Pretending to be kind, I sent her daily photos of trendy downtown shops and places young people might like. Each time, Alyssa, unaware of my true feelings, responded happily. That's amazing! I've always wanted to go to that shop. Then when you come here, I'll take you to lots of places. I didn't go out much with my daughter Kelly, so can I think of you as my own daughter? Of course. Forget about Kelly who's far away, and just think of me as your daughter. Her words made me feel insincere. The family's getting bigger, how wonderful! Alyssa, mistaking her acceptance as being favored. She's probably just naive, not realizing the implications of her words. Just a kid voicing her desires without knowing the world. Thinking this way made the situation somewhat bearable. Perhaps, in thinking I wanted a love life that could change my life, I wasn't so different. Yes, that's right. I'll also furnish everything for you. Since you're starting a new life in a new place, everything should be new. Alyssa responded with a voice full of joy. Thank you, Misty. If it were Kelly, she wouldn't have been so delighted just because I offered to buy her things. She was always considerate towards me, a single mother. Losing her dad in elementary school, she must have felt loneliness more than anyone. Yet she never once said she was lonely to me. When asked what she wanted for her birthday, she'd always say, I just want to eat your cooking, leaving me clueless about what she really wanted, never having given her a present. Kelly always put others before herself and had many friends, yet I wish she had been a bit more dependent on me. She seemed like such a grown-up child to me. Alyssa is the complete opposite. She must have been coddled by her parents and probably Kent and Tarek as well. Which is why she can brazenly move into someone else's home. It was the same when Tarek arrived. He just showed up at my apartment and made himself at home as if it was the most natural thing in the world. Back then, I was so in love with him that I found it endearing, but now it feels like a distant memory. Today, the multitude of photos handed to me by the investigator shattered my heart completely. As expected, Tarek had been unfaithful multiple times after we got married. While confirming the results felt like an I knew it moment, the difference between suspicion and undeniable fact was devastating. In front of the investigator, I couldn't help but cry. I thought I wouldn't be upset over something like infidelity at this point, but contrary to my will, tears flowed ceaselessly. Like a stray cat fed in various places, Tarek had been unfaithful with many others. I wanted to tear up the photos of him with other women, but they were crucial evidence. And it was my issue to confront, having been swept away by naive thoughts until now. Oblivious to my feelings, Tarek spent the day lounging and watching TV as usual. Compared to America, other countries have so much conflict. Everyone should just live in harmony and help each other out. Don't you think, Misty? He spoke to me while I was busily cleaning beside him. A little while ago, I might have found such a demeanor endearing, but now it only filled me with disgust. Yet, I maintained my composure and replied, "Yes, you're right. If everyone helped each other out, maybe there would be no conflicts in this world." Exactly. No one wants to fight. Just enjoying the moment and living life is enough. Tarek yawned as he said this. Though it's true no one wants conflict, it seems he never learned that avoiding it requires sincerity and consideration for others' feelings. I found myself reminiscing about Sterling's sincerity. He lacked Tarek's charm, but he was incredibly sincere towards me. Not just towards me, but in all his dealings, it seemed. He wasn't particularly popular, but he always had a steady smile and rarely showed any emotional ups and downs. Perhaps that's why he passed away so early. Good people often seem to leave this world first, while the immature ones like Tarek and myself linger on. Hey, Tarek. I want to do a big cleanup before Kent and Alyssa arrive, so could you leave the house for a while? Why not take a trip with them? Then you can all come back together on the moving day. I'll make the house nice and welcoming for you. I said this and placed an envelope with money in front of him. He slowly picked it up and looked inside. You said you haven't been much of a father, right? Why not take them on a trip? Then Tarek looked up at me with a happy smile. That's a good idea. Thanks, Misty. I think they'll be happy. I watched his back as he prepared to leave and thought, "Goodbye, Tarek." As I watched him shrink in the distance, I muttered to myself. And then, the day Kent and Alyssa were to move in arrived. But I wasn't waiting to welcome them. I had left the house early in the morning. My destination was the airport. Kelly had finished her job overseas and was returning home today. Her return was sudden, but honestly, I felt relieved. After everything that had happened, my heart was unsettled, but with Kelly here, I believed I could return to my true self. As I headed to the airport, looking forward to seeing Kelly after a long time, my mobile phone received a message. But I pretended not to notice and continued on the bus. Ignoring the repeated messages, eventually, the phone began to ring. I picked it up as I arrived at the airport lobby. It was Alyssa. Hey! Old woman! Where are you? So, it seems I was known as Old Woman among them, not Misty. They never really thought of me as family. All our conversations had been nothing but deception. If that's the case, there's no need for me to feel guilty. I could feel the tension in my temples. The key doesn't work, and there's a for sale sign on the door. You didn't lie to us, did you? Alyssa exclaimed as if shouting. The call seemed to be on speakerphone, as I could hear voices in the background. It's no use. We can't get in. Tarek's voice was filled with distress. I could almost see him panicking, realizing the key he had was useless, but I felt no pain in my heart. With no one seeing my face, I allowed myself to smile broadly, likely forming a grin that would make anyone uncomfortable. Like that of a wicked witch. Oh, you found out? I said mockingly, with a mean-spirited laugh, conveying my feelings through the phone. What do you mean by this? Alyssa demanded, her anger clear. What do I mean? It should be obvious if you think about it. We're strangers to each other. Why would you think you could live in a house I bought? You're quite naive. Then I heard Tarek say, Give it to me, Alyssa. I have it on speaker, just speak from there. I can hear everything clearly, including all your panicking voices and everything else. Half of what I was doing felt like an act. Yet, the earnest half must seem like madness to them. Misty, what is the meaning of this? Our house is listed for sale. Just as it says. And it's not our house, it's my house. Your belongings have been sent to your parents' house. By now, they should have received the photos proving your infidelity. Oh, and I enclosed the divorce papers too, so please submit them. Sending photos of her son's infidelity to his parents might seem like a reckless move, but gentle Tarek's reaction was unexpected. Misty, are you leaving me? His voice was so feeble, almost on the verge of tears. I was taken aback by his reaction. If he had shown anger, I could have retaliated with the harsh words I had prepared. Trying to garner sympathy now? He's truly hopeless. Your sad voice won't change anything. If anyone should be crying, it's me. I retorted strongly. Dad, are you okay? This concerned voice must be Kent's. However, he didn't seem inclined to scold me. Don't cry, Dad. Just hang in there. Kent seemed to be only worried about Tarek. Maybe he's kind but ineffectual like Tarek. Which is why he ended up with someone as presumptuous as Alyssa. Instead of just lamenting, Alyssa took a more aggressive stance. You think you can get away with this, old woman? You said you'd prepare everything for the house, so we got rid of most of our stuff. This isn't what we agreed on. What are you going to do about this? I never told you to throw away the furniture. That was your doing. Besides, no one ever thought of me as family, right? We never had a trust relationship to begin with, so there were no promises. I let out the lines I had prepared in my head. Pretending to be nice while being so cruel. You're the worst. That goes both ways, Alyssa. Anyway, I just sold my own house. I'm divorcing Tarek, and he's no longer my concern. You were wrong to trust him. Then Alyssa's anger turned towards Kent. I can't stand this anymore. Kent, I want a divorce. I married you because you said we could live in a detached house in the city. Alyssa raged in hysteria. However, Kent could only apologize, saying, I'm sorry. I couldn't help but criticize Kent's indecisiveness. Kent, I shouldn't be the one to say this, as an outsider, but you should think carefully when choosing a spouse. You shouldn't judge people by their looks. Better safe than sorry. Tarek then interjected. I'd be in trouble if you left me, Misty. My parents have stopped sending me money. Without a home, what am I supposed to do tomorrow? Please come back. I was utterly astounded by his words. Tarek, at 40, thought it normal to rely on his parents' allowances. What terrified me the most was that I had tolerated such a man. Love is blind, but waking up from that love feels like hell. Kelly had told me not to have regrets, yet I was overwhelmed by them. Sorry, but Kelly is returning from overseas today. She says she's going to work here now. So, I've decided to live with Kelly. I won't be lonely anymore, and you have plenty of company, right? You should go to them. But in truth, I knew he had nowhere to go. Because I had confronted his mistresses with the evidence of his cheating. And none of them wanted to continue seeing Tarek after seeing photos from his lawful wife. He was less welcome than a stray cat. I have nowhere to go. Nobody is answering their phone. Then you should go to your parents' house. Your belongings are already there. Just submit the divorce papers quickly. If you have any complaints, I'm ready to face them. I don't mind taking this to court. Suddenly, my vision started to blur. As if the focus of a camera was being lost, and the scenery in front of me became indistinct. Before everything faded, I said, "Then, goodbye," and hung up the phone. Looking at the dim phone screen, I realized for the first time that I had been crying. I went to the restroom to meticulously wipe away my tears. However, Kelly, having reunited with me after a long time, immediately noticed something was wrong. She's always been sensitive to others' moods. "Mom, what happened?" Worried, Kelly asked, and I tried to remain as calm as possible in my response. "I haven't told you, but I'm thinking of getting a divorce. So, let's live together. Just the two of us, carefree, in a downtown house with a garden." Then Kelly's expression darkened. For a moment, I feared she would refuse. Fearing my presence might be a hindrance to her independence. After all, she had her own life, and to her, my presence could be seen as a constraint. But the next moment, Kelly uttered surprising words. "Actually, there's something I haven't told you, Mom. I've been wanting to say it, but I was too scared. But listen, I'm pregnant." According to her story, Kelly had been dating a foreign man for about a year and had been considering marriage eventually. However, as soon as she discovered she was pregnant, he unilaterally broke up with her. Shocked, Kelly even considered terminating the pregnancy. But after much deliberation, she couldn't bear the thought of ending an innocent life. Ultimately, she decided to quit her job and return to her home country. I was speechless and shocked, unable to imagine Kelly going through such an ordeal. I could see a faint glimmer in Kelly's worried eyes. I embraced her and said, "I'm so happy to be a grandmother. Sterling would be delighted in heaven too. Let's take care of your baby together." Kelly then burst into tears. The first time I had ever seen her cry. I held Kelly close, determined to support her decision to keep the baby. "There's nothing to be afraid of. We'll get through this together." I comforted a pregnant Kelly as we returned home from the airport. Of course, there was no one else there. This house was now just for me and Kelly. "Mom, there's a for sale sign on this house." I responded with a reassuring smile to the worried Kelly, and tore off the for sale sign in one swift move. "That was just a bluff. This house is ours now. I renewed everything before you came back. I even cooked a lot today, especially for you. You need to eat a lot since you're pregnant." Kelly stepped into the entrance, relieved. I followed her, carrying her suitcase into the house. "Welcome home, Kelly." "I'm happy to be home, Mom." We exchanged smiles. "And welcome to our home, baby." Saying this, I touched Kelly's still slightly swollen belly, feeling the new life's heartbeat beneath my hands. A few days later, my divorce from Tarek was finalized. Abandoned by his parents and everyone else, he occasionally reached out to me, but I ignored all his attempts. He should be grateful I didn't ask for alimony in our divorce settlement. Then, I heard news of Tarek's arrest. He was caught breaking into an ex-wife's home to steal money, apparently not his first offense. Rumors had circulated about mysterious thefts at the magazine company he used to work for, leading to his industry ostracization. I thought he was harmless despite his irresponsibility, but he had been dabbling in actual crime. Continuing our relationship would have been dangerous. Moreover, Kent and Alyssa were under investigation, possibly involved in Tarek's crimes. Apparently, Alyssa had a poor relationship with her mother-in-law and had been contentious for some time. Though Tarek was considered the mastermind, I suspected Alyssa might have been the true orchestrator. Regardless, I hope they confess and atone for their crimes soon. Kelly's pregnancy progressed quickly. Even having been through childbirth myself, witnessing it from the side overwhelmed me with its mystery. Imagining the growth of the child inside her filled me with joy. Fortuitously, a book publishing offer came my way. A collection of my articles and recipes had garnered demand from many readers. Of course, as an unknown writer, publishing a book was beyond my dreams, so I eagerly accepted the offer. And so, I became a grandma. Welcoming Kelly and the baby into our home, where spring had arrived and the flowers I had planted during winter were in full bloom. Seeds I had sown in the garden were sprouting, promising growth. Supporting Kelly as a single mother, I looked forward to our enjoyable second life together. My heart too was filled with the beautiful blue skies of spring. For the past 20 years since we got married, I thought I had been doing my best for my husband Paul and my mother-in-law, Dorothy. But then, out of the blue, Paul told me, "Starting next month, I'm going to live with Mom and Angela," announcing his plans to move in with Dorothy and his sister Angela. To make matters worse, Dorothy insulted me by saying, "Parasites from outside the family should go back to their own homes." That was the moment I finally woke up. I said, "Understood. Then I'll leave." With those words, I left the house the next day. However, when furniture and appliances started being moved out one after another, and Paul and his family heard that I had moved into a new condominium reputed to be worth $1 million, they were furious and came storming over. My name is Linda, and I'm 48 years old. I work in the accounting department of an air conditioning company. I lived with Paul, who is 2 years younger than me, and my mother-in-law Dorothy. We have no children. Paul and I first met when he joined the large real estate development company where I worked. Initially, I watched from the sidelines as he was doted on by female colleagues and older male employees, thinking he was just a man of these times. But for some reason, Paul said to me, "Other accountants are kind of hard to approach, but you have a gentle aura, Linda." He started assigning most of his paperwork to me. However, whether he was naturally scatterbrained or just carefree, I couldn't tell, but even when I pointed out errors in his documents or last-minute submissions, he would quickly apologize, saying, "I'm really sorry." While I appreciated his willingness to apologize, the fact that he rarely corrected his behavior meant I often ended up working overtime because of him. It seemed clever, or rather sly, to keep up a cheerful facade, but each time I couldn't help feeling a bit troubled inside. Yet, whenever I appeared to struggle with the office supplies provided, he would bring me stationery he recommended, showing a thoughtfulness that always made me forgive him. In the end, I was being won over, just as he was, by taking care of him. Our relationship took a significant leap forward when I fell ill on the commuter train. Perhaps due to staying late at work during the busy season, I suddenly felt dizzy. Somehow, I managed to endure until I reached the station closest to our office, But then I slumped over on a bench on the platform, unable to move and fighting the nausea that was creeping up on me. Noticing my condition, Paul, despite my protests about getting his suit dirty, carried me to the station's medical room, following the station staff's instructions. Afterward, I took some medicine I had with me and lay down for a while. Eventually, the dizziness subsided, and I contacted the office again, only to be instructed by my boss to go home for the day. Moreover, Paul, who had stayed with me, was ordered to make sure I got home safely. Though I initially refused, I ended up letting him escort me home. The next day, I went to work as usual, apologized to my boss and colleagues, and then visited Paul in the sales department to explain the situation to his boss and apologize. I really inconvenienced you, and I want to do something to make it up to you. How about this? Treat me to dinner this Friday. I'm short on cash right before payday. Paul's innocent request made me burst out laughing, and I agreed. While I intended it to be a one-time meal, he insisted. Now that I've gotten my paycheck, let me treat you this time as a way of saying thanks. A reciprocation of thanks, and then another, somehow led to us being seen as a couple by those around us before we knew it. But when I rushed to deny the rumors, I found I was the only one in a panic. Paul, ever the laid-back one, said, "There's no need to deny it so desperately. I don't mind being thought of that way." Just like that, we came to be treated as a couple by everyone around us. And 2 years later, when I turned 28, maybe it's about time we got married. It would probably make everyone else feel more at ease. He suggested, and we got married. However, I had intended to keep working, but it was unexpected when Paul, who also worked at the same company, told me it was suffocating and asked me to quit. Considering your age, shouldn't you focus on having children first? Similarly to Dorothy, Paul also strongly suggested that I resign from my job. Moreover, while we had hoped to live in a condominium about 30 minutes away by train if we were both working, the conversation about living with Paul's parents came up. In fact, my father-in-law had passed away 10 years ago, and ever since my sister-in-law Angela, who is 4 years older than Paul, got married and moved out 3 years ago, Dorothy and Paul had been living alone together. Although I knew as the eldest son, Paul would eventually live with his parents, I wasn't keen on starting our marriage living with them. However, if Paul were to move out, Dorothy, being left alone, strongly opposed living separately. Convinced by the economic benefits of saving on rent, we started our married life living together. For a while after we got married, everything was peaceful. Dorothy was proud of Angela, who graduated from a prestigious university, landed a job at a major general trading company, and married an elite man from her workplace. Despite being the eldest son, Dorothy seemed to show little interest in Paul. Angela, who lived in a condominium about 30 minutes away by train from her parents' home, often begged Dorothy to help with household chores. "Mom, please come help. I'm too busy every day to handle all the housework." Dorothy, flattered by her beloved daughter's plea, didn't mind at all and regularly went to Angela's condominium, acting like a maid, cooking, cleaning, and doing laundry. However, there were times when Dorothy alone wasn't enough to handle everything, or when Angela took a vacation and they went out for afternoon tea at their favorite hotel, that I would also be called upon to help. But on regular days, Dorothy barely interfered with Paul and me, making our cohabitation more comfortable than I had anticipated. Given that, I thought helping out at Angela's place occasionally wasn't much of an issue. However, one day, Angela and Dorothy planned a one-night trip for rest and relaxation. During their absence, I was asked to tidy up Angela's house alone. Angela said it would be bad to inconvenience her husband while we're gone, so please take care of the cleaning, laundry, and prepare meals in advance. After sending Angela and Dorothy off and receiving the keys, I entered Angela's condominium and began doing the household chores as instructed. Cleaning, laundry, ironing, I went about my usual routine. But when it came time to store the prepared dishes in the fridge, make sure you chill his favorite brand of beer. He gets grumpy if it's not cold, I remembered being told. Checking the fridge, I found not a single bottle of the crucial beer. Only the mineral water and beauty drinks Angela drinks every night. I should have checked before going shopping. I regretted, but it was too late. Reluctantly, I headed to the nearest supermarket, only to find they didn't stock the specific brand of beer. The beer Angela's husband preferred was a Belgian brand, not as readily available as domestic brands in any supermarket. Initially, I thought finding it would be easy if I just went to another store, but after visiting nearby supermarkets and drugstores that also sell food, I couldn't find the brand anywhere. Back then, map apps weren't as widespread, and I wasn't familiar with the area around Angela's condominium, so I had no idea where to find what stores. Despite rushing around in a panic, I couldn't find it, and time was running out. Eventually, I caught a taxi to a liquor store a bit further away and finally found the beer. By the time I returned to the condominium, it was nearly 5 p.m. I just wanted to put the beer in the fridge and head home. As I entered Angela's room, I saw her husband, Charles, standing in the living room. "Charles, you're home early." As I said this, trying to tidy up the apron and the bag of food containers left on the sofa. "What's all this?" "I was told we hired someone to take care of the house," he questioned. According to Charles, he had initially planned to invite his mother to live with them since they were both going to be working full-time. "My family is just like my wife's. My dad has passed away, and since I have no siblings, my mom is the only one I can rely on. So, I asked her to live with us in exchange for helping with household chores," he explained. However, Angela retorted, "Then I want to invite my mom to live with us too. It's unfair and dishonest to favor only your mother." I was scolded for that. As a result of the discussion, it was decided not to rely on either of our parents, but to hire someone for the household chores. And it was settled that we would share the costs for this. However, in reality, Dorothy and I were secretly called upon to do the housework. Upon learning the truth, Charles immediately contacted Angela's mobile phone. Perhaps sensing trouble, Angela and Dorothy rushed back from their trip, but it escalated into a big fight with Charles demanding explanations. Unable to leave and forced to listen in, it seemed Angela had been using the money Charles gave her for housekeeping on her own spa treatments and leisure activities with Dorothy. Dorothy managed to apologize on the spot, promising to be more careful in the future. But later on, it came to light that Dorothy and Angela had been gifting presents to and going out drinking with the handsome stylist at their favorite hair salon. Furious, especially after the previous incident, Charles refused to listen to Dorothy's persuasion, leading to a divorce. Since Angela and her husband had only been married for about 5 years and lived in a rental condominium, there was no dispute over assets, and they divorced without any compensation. It seems she couldn't bear the rumors at the workplace since they worked at the same company. Angela, having been scouted, resigned and moved to another company simultaneously with her divorce. However, it seems she struggled to build her career as hoped in the new environment. Angela, frustrated, began to lash out at me along with Dorothy. "It's all your fault this happened. If only you had handled things better, none of this would have occurred. You're the one who ruined my life." That's how they started blaming me. Moreover, at a time when I was distressed over not being able to have children, Dorothy mocked me, saying, "I wanted to see my grandchildren, but I guess it's for the best. A grandchild born from such a defective woman wouldn't have been lovable anyway." She said that bluntly. The sheer unfairness made me burst into tears. But what shocked me more was when Paul saw me crying and disdainfully said, "If you're going to cry and regret your sins now, why couldn't you have just done as they said? It's me who wants to cry, being caught up in your mistakes." Hearing that made me feel so devastated, my legs almost gave way. Because it meant Paul seriously thought I was to blame, despite knowing everything. In other words, I had no allies in this house. Realizing this, I immediately thought of divorce, but being a housewife with no job made it not so simple to just say I wanted a divorce. I could go back to my parents' house, but moving back unemployed to a house where my brother and his wife lived nearby would just make me feel small. And it would likely be hard to find a job in the countryside that would allow me to live on my own. So, I decided to focus first on establishing a financial foundation, swallowing my pride. I found a part-time job in accounting, secretly relying on connections from my previous job. I got permission by tearfully telling Dorothy and Paul, "It pains me to just be a housewife when we're struggling to have children, so I want to at least work a part-time job to help with the household finances." And I started working the next month. Of course, neglecting housework could lead to snide comments and possibly demands to quit my job. That's why I pushed myself hard, even when tired or feeling unwell. I made no compromises at work, seizing any chance to improve and continuing to strive. As a result, I was promoted to a full-time position in the second year of my part-time job. 5 years later, I was invited by a former boss to join the current air conditioning company and have continued to work hard. But recently, as we approached our 20th wedding anniversary, after dinner, as I was doing the dishes, Paul came and said, "Come to the living room, I have something to tell you." It was unusual for him to seek me out as he usually spent his time happily with Dorothy, indifferent to whatever I was doing in the house. With that thought, I went to the living room, and before I could even sit down, "This has already been decided," Paul began. "Starting next month, I'm going to live with Mom and Angela," he declared. Dumbfounded, Dorothy added, "Angela's been overworked at her new job, got sick, and needs to recuperate at home. It's best for her to relax here, and if that's the case, it's better without an extra mouth to feed, right?" Then, coming over to my side on purpose, she said, "Parasites from outside the family should go back to their own homes," making a shooing gesture at me. They watched my reaction with a malicious smile, but inside, I smiled at the thought of being freed from this hassle. Then I slowly smiled at them and said, "I understand. I'll leave tomorrow afternoon." As I walked to my room, I glanced at their faces, as dumbfounded as I had been a moment ago. The next morning, after seeing Paul off to work, I waited for the second-hand goods buyer I had contacted the night before. Unaware, Dorothy was startled by the arrival of the unfamiliar men, but we started the work without minding her. From the kitchen, the refrigerator, oven range, dishwasher, Dorothy's favorite soda maker, and dining set were all taken. Of course, I didn't forget the IH cooking heater. Next, in the living room, the TV, air conditioner, the diligently working robot vacuum, and AI speaker. The off-season hot carpet and sofa set were also listed. Then, the fully automatic washing machine, Paul's room's computer desk, and bookshelf. In addition, the air conditioner, bed, and dresser in Dorothy and Paul's rooms were quickly appraised. As the dealer started making a call, Dorothy, seemingly coming to her senses, rushed over furiously. "Hey! What are you starting here? Entering people's bedrooms!" she shrieked at me, to which I replied with a smile. "Since I'm just a parasite from outside the family, I thought I should at least take care of my own belongings before making my exit." Just then, additional personnel called by the dealer arrived. After that, the furniture and appliances listed were swiftly moved out of my husband's family home. Overwhelmed by the efficient and purposeful movement, Dorothy could only pace restlessly around. Then, as a final touch, after removing all the room lights, the dealer quickly left. What remained were Paul's computer and the bedding for his bed placed directly on the floor, and Dorothy's cosmetics left on the floor, visible to the eye. Then, Dorothy exclaimed again.
"Wait a minute! Do you think you can get away with doing something like this?"
To which I simply responded, "I'll be consulting a lawyer for the rest." With that, I left my husband's family home, pulling along a suitcase I had packed the night before. A week later, after receiving a call from the lawyer I had hired, Paul, Dorothy, and Keiko rushed to the lawyer's office on the same day. When I arrived late,
"You call us here and then show up late. What a disgraceful woman!"
immediate angry shouts were thrown at me. But then, Mr. Smith, the lawyer, clarified. "We did not summon you here. It was you who came unannounced right after we informed you that I would be handling future negotiations." Hearing this, the normally confrontational Paul immediately quieted down. Then, as if seeking vengeance for her son, Dorothy was ready to fight. "Now that we're face to face, let's talk. After leaving like a thief, there's no way you can just come back. But if you're willing to apologize and show remorse, that's a different story," she said in one breath, glaring at me. Angela and Paul were nodding vigorously beside her, probably thinking I would jump at the chance to discuss this topic. How naive. At my signal, the lawyer smoothly began. "Of course, she has no intention of returning. The discussion is about signing the divorce papers, property division, and compensation." Stunned by these words, the three of them exclaimed,
"We're not getting a divorce!
"Property division and compensation!
How audacious! How dare you!"
All at once, creating a racket. When things got out of control, the lawyer's coughing brought some quiet, and I calmly stated, "Divorce is a settled matter. If you do not agree, we are prepared to proceed with mediation or court." They tried to raise their voices again, but another cough from the lawyer made them quiet down. After some whispered discussions among themselves, they surprisingly quickly signed the divorce papers I presented. However, their attitude changed again when it came to property division and compensation. "How audacious to talk about property division! You were just a part-timer, practically a parasite to Paul. To think we made such a failure our son's wife, we should be the ones receiving compensation.
We won't pay a penny."
They began to berate again. Then, I presented the recent 5 years household accounts and the bank account statements I used for managing living expenses. Initially, Paul and Dorothy didn't understand, but as the lawyer explained with the documents, their complexions darkened. Because for about the last 5 years, I had been paying approximately $3,200 a month for living expenses, practically covering everything.
"That's ridiculous! I've been contributing $1,500 a month to our household."
Paul protested, but against the $1,500 Paul deposited, the revolving credit payments for Paul and Dorothy's cards were nearly the same amount. Effectively, even if his salary was deposited, it just went out from one hand to the other. Instead, the $3,200 from my salary account covered the remodeling loan, Paul and Dorothy's car loan, groceries, and all the loans for furniture and appliances. In the past 5 years, since Linda became the head of the accounting department at her current company, almost all of her income went into the household. That amounts to about $190,000 in total. Despite such contribution, it's quite something to be called a parasite, the lawyer stated. The three were wide-eyed, flipping through the documents, but what the lawyer stated was an undeniable fact. Realizing they were at a disadvantage, Dorothy suddenly said,
"Hey, Linda. We were once husband and wife, daughter-in-law and mother-in-law, and sisters-in-law, weren't we? Let's stop fighting and walk our separate paths peacefully."
She tried to appeal to me with a conciliatory tone. I responded, "Yes, that's right. And I also let my temper get the best of me the other day and sold off all the furniture and appliances. Let's both act like adults and part ways peacefully." With that, I requested the lawyer to draft a divorce agreement. We both agreed to renounce our rights to property division and compensation in the divorce agreement. After making it official with a notary public, Paul and I shook hands, ending our 20-year marriage. But the story didn't end there. After completing the procedures, Paul, Dorothy, and I went our separate ways. 2 months later, I began receiving numerous messages from them on the only social media account I hadn't blocked. Initially, I ignored them, but the constant barrage of messages, day and night, became too annoying. Hearing they had even shown up at the lawyer's office demanding to see me, I decided to meet them one last time to set things straight. This time, I arrived a bit earlier than the agreed time, but Paul and the others were already there, looking restless and somewhat shabbier than before. As soon as they saw me, Paul barked,
"You bought a room in that new condominium in front of the station, didn't you?"
I had chosen a property not affiliated with Paul's company, but they must have found out somehow. Then Dorothy joined in, yelling,
"Where did you hide that money? If it's from during our marriage, it should be shared property, right? Coward!"
Their noise was unbearable, so I reminded them that we had both agreed to waive our rights to property division. They seemed to have conveniently forgotten anything unfavorable to them. Paul and my mother-in-law turned pale, but quickly retorted,
"That's the same as being tricked. The one who hid it is to blame."
The lawyer then coolly stated, "The funds for Linda's condominium purchase came from the sale proceeds of stock options she had received upon joining her current company. This does not fall under marital assets. If you still claim rights, we'll see you in court." Paul fell silent at that. But Dorothy went even further.
"Oh, is that so? If that's your attitude, we'll take this to court or whatever it takes."
Saying this, she huffed angrily. I then countered, "In that case, I'll also file for damages." The psychological damage wasn't minor, considering you were so openly looking for a new partner even before our divorce was finalized. I laughed as I said this, making Dorothy's face go pale. Next to her, Angela, who had been sitting dazed, also turned white when I added, "Of course, Angela, I'll be claiming damages for the emotional distress you've caused me. I've kept all the evidence of the verbal abuse and harassment you've inflicted on me after your divorce from Charles." I laid out a voice recorder, USB drives, and printed messages as proof. Lastly, I said,
"By the way, Angela, you know Mary, right? Actually, she's the daughter of my direct superior."
As I looked straight into Angela's eyes with a smile, her complexion turned even paler. I had already discussed and consulted my current employer to some extent about the situation to prevent any disruption in my work. In fact, that supervisor has a daughter named Mary. I've met her a few times at company BBQs and other events, a cheerful and wonderful woman. However, right after graduating from university and joining a company, Mary faced terrible harassment from her boss and is currently on leave due to mental health issues. The person who harassed her was Angela. Mary's parents divorced when she was young, and since then, she has been living with her father. Because Mary didn't have any close female figures, I was asked to take her out for meals and shopping to help her get a change of scenery, to which I happily agreed.
Our conversations started with trivial matters, and I mostly listened to Mary, but I was shocked when Angela's name came up. At the same time, I learned that Angela's so-called medical leave was a complete lie. She was actually under a home stay order because her treatment of Mary had become a problem at work. This prompted me to start preparing for a divorce as quickly as possible. If Angela were to be demoted or fired, she would undoubtedly end up moving into my husband's family home. That would put me in an even more difficult financial and mental position. I was wondering how to initiate a divorce to my advantage when I was conveniently kicked out by them. I made a show of selling all the furniture and appliances. I pretended to make a sacrifice by giving up claims to property division and compensation. The reason I made a notarized document was because of the new share options. After all, due to Paul and Dorothy, I had hardly any savings, so if we had gone through a strict property division, I would have ended up paying out more. There's no guarantee of getting compensation if there's no money to pay it, even if I won the case. That's why it was necessary to make them give up their claim to property division by bringing up the issue of living expenses and making them feel indebted. Paul, Dorothy, and Angela finally understood everything. The foolish trio, who thought they could go back to their usual lives without the parasite me, left with their shoulders slumped. Their downfall afterwards was severe. Dorothy, just as I had pointed out, not only spread the word that she was going to decisively break up her son with his part-time job-capable wife and me, but also said,
"So, if you know any nice girls, I'd love for you to introduce them to my son."
She even went as far as to demand dinner parties to introduce her son to women. Of course, among those approached, people of standing talked behind Dorothy's back, saying it was absurd to look for a new partner for her son before even finalizing the divorce with his current wife. Moreover, setting such conditions, she must be greatly overestimating what her son is worth. They were said to have laughed at this. And the conditions Dorothy deemed suitable for Paul's wife were astonishing.
First off, she should be in her early 20s. Anyone older would be too influenced by society's nonsense about equality in marriage, right?
She was reported to have said. This alone was shocking enough, but Dorothy didn't stop there.
Of course, we'll cut ties with the wife's family, but before that, they should hand over their inheritance up front. We need someone with a certain level of assets and financial power. And could we get a medical checkup to ensure she's capable of having children?
She went as far as to say this, earning herself contempt from listeners. Unaware of the cold stares around her, she continued.
Of course, being tall, stylish, and beautiful is a given. Thank you in advance.
Naturally, no marriage proposals came Dorothy's way, and in her desperation, she apparently sent a flurry of urgent calls and messages. However, she was either turned down because no one met her conditions or simply ignored. Soon, the rumors of my divorce spread among friends, acquaintances, and neighbors, making them a subject of ridicule. Perhaps unable to bear the disdainful looks due to their previously arrogant behavior, they ended up confining themselves within their home, not going out anymore. Recently, there have been rumors about hearing screams, shouts, and the sound of breaking dishes coming from their house, supposedly from Dorothy. Previously, Dorothy would vent her frustrations on me or indulge in spending to relieve stress. Now, without me as her punching bag and unable to shop or take short trips for stress relief, she might be wreaking havoc at home. Meanwhile, Paul had left all financial matters to me since our marriage. He seemed not to understand the basics of budgeting, and even after the lawyer explained it clearly, he remained overconfident, thinking,
"If she could manage the living expenses, then I can easily do it too if I put my mind to it."
That appears to have been his careless assumption. However, Dorothy and Angela, who were supposed to take over the household chores, abandoned everything, considering it too much of a hassle. Meals became all delivery or takeout, and cleaning and laundry were left to a housekeeping service, among other miscellaneous tasks, leading to a financial breakdown in just 2 months. The credit card Dorothy used for living expenses was quickly revoked, and their meals turned to just toast and coffee for breakfast, instant noodles for lunch, and mainly takeout for dinner. Laundry was done all at once when they ran out of clothes. Living a life of only cleaning visible areas, they ended up leading a nutritionally unbalanced and unsanitary lifestyle. Paul, who was once praised for looking younger than his age, gained unhealthy weight, his skin became rough, his hair greasy, and his once handsome appearance vanished. Not fitting the image of a salesperson, he received a flood of complaints from clients. This led to him being relegated to back-end work with a reduced salary. Paul reached out to the lawyer, saying, "I've come to my senses. I was deceived by Mom and Angela. I want to cut ties with them and start over." Through phone calls and emails. But as prearranged, "I've been instructed not to engage with you under any circumstances," was the firm response. They warned that if they attempted to approach my workplace or new home, the police would be contacted immediately. Thankfully, that put an end to any further contact. As for Mary, another main character in this saga, she was furious when I shared the entire story with her. "What's that supposed to mean? I thought she might have learned something from what happened with me, but she's blaming her divorce on you and resorting to such harassment. She's always been that kind of person, hasn't she?" she raged. After contacting the company where she was on leave, intending to resign, she was called in and questioned about her reasons. Mary explained that while the issue was personal and not directly related to her work, she disclosed everything about the situation to HR and administration. After ensuring that those present were shocked by the story, she stated, "There must have been faults on my part in the issue with me as well. I was hoping we could work together for the company if you sincerely reflected on it. But I cannot see that happening," she asserted firmly. While presenting her resignation letter, she said, "Working under her again would be a mental health hazard for me." Mary then transferred to a competitor that allowed her to work remotely until her health fully recovered. At her former department, the news of Mary's sudden resignation, who was supposed to be on leave, shocked everyone. Rumors spread that the harassment from Angela continued outside the company, leading to an uncontrollable situation. Some colleagues, who admired Mary, a leader among the younger staff, started considering changing jobs, prompting the higher-ups to convene urgent discussions. As a result, Angela was transferred to a subsidiary in another state after her home stay period ended. Despite Angela's resistance, claiming the transfer was an unfair treatment, the threat of dismissal forced her to reluctantly accept the assignment. However, at the new company, rumors had already spread, leaving her completely isolated, with no one to socialize with and receiving only the bare minimum of communication needed for work. Crying to Paul and Dorothy, "I want to quit. I want to come back," she was met with, "We don't need an unemployed troublemaker. Whose fault do you think this is?" "That's right. You are the real disaster and parasite." She was harshly rebuked by the two. Now, in a corner of the subsidiary where no one approaches her, she continues to work, a shadow of her former self. As for me, after the divorce from Paul was finalized and this whole ordeal ended, encouraged by Mary, I remarried my boss after about half a year of living together. To be honest, considering my 20-year marriage with Paul, I wasn't inclined towards remarrying, but Mary said something along the lines of, "It might sound odd coming from his daughter, but marriage can be good depending on the partner. I think my dad, despite his age, is quite a catch." Mary encouraged me, seeing my hesitation. Indeed, in less than a year, I've laughed more than during the entire 20 years with Paul. Having a partner to share a life where I can be myself has truly brought happiness. Sometimes, I think if I had made this decision sooner. I do feel a bit of regret, but dwelling on the past and wasting the remaining time seems far more wasteful. I plan to cherish the peaceful life ahead with my new husband and daughter. One afternoon, I received a call from an unusual person. It was Elizabeth, my best friend who had stolen Matthew, my ex-husband, from me 10 years ago. Reluctantly, I decided to answer the phone. Then, without much of a greeting, Elizabeth dropped a bombshell.
I had twins. I'd like an $18,000 baby shower gift, please.
To think she had the nerve to ask me for such a thing after taking Matthew from me. Such feelings began to surface, but thanks to Joseph, who was looking at me with concern, I came back to my senses. That's right. I have Joseph now. Elizabeth, receiving no response from me, pressed for an answer. I replied to her with a cheerful voice. Sure. I'll bring it over with my husband, the bank president.
What?
I could hear Elizabeth's pitiful voice. I continued.
I've remarried. Why didn't you tell me? That's obvious, isn't it? I didn't want you to steal him too. We're best friends, aren't we?
Elizabeth screamed about being heartless, but I couldn't help laughing. And slowly, I replied to her words.
The one who betrayed first was you.
At that, Elizabeth was at a loss for words. I unilaterally ended the call and explained the situation to Joseph beside me. And so, I decided to proceed with my plan for revenge. My name is Linda, a 45-year-old housewife. I live a happy married life with my husband Joseph and our 2 children. It's my second marriage to Joseph. Joseph was a single father with 2 children already. Meeting Joseph, I wanted to support him and decided to marry him. Joseph is very kind and family-oriented. Despite being busy with work, he helps with household chores and childcare. I loved Joseph for that. On the contrary, I still consider my first marriage a failure. I met my ex-husband Matthew online. We matched around the time I turned 30 and married because we got along well. But after marrying, I realized Matthew and I had completely different hobbies and values. But it's too late for regrets. Still, in the beginning, both Matthew and I tried to meet each other halfway. The dark clouds over our marriage gathered about a year after getting married. It all started when my best friend visited our new home. This visit would plunge me into the depths of misfortune.
Hey, can I come over to your place?
That was Elizabeth, my best friend. She couldn't attend our wedding due to her schedule, so she wanted to celebrate at our house at a convenient time.
Would it be okay to come over when your husband is also there? I want to say hello.
I'd love that. Please come. Elizabeth was my best friend since high school. She was the first to speak to me when I entered. And despite everything, I loved her dearly. So, I readily accepted Elizabeth's request. Little did I know, this would lead to such a disaster. The following week, Elizabeth visited my new home with lots of gifts.
Nice to meet you. I'm Elizabeth, Linda's best friend.
Nice to meet you. My wife always talks about you. Elizabeth smiled and greeted Matthew. Then followed him into the living room. I walked behind them and headed straight for the kitchen.
Oh, I'd like some tea.
Ah, then I'll have the same. Matthew, usually a coffee person, opting for tea. From the kitchen, I sighed as I looked into the living room. Do you have tea? Asking me while still fixated on Elizabeth, Matthew didn't even look my way. Elizabeth has always been beautiful, and I understand why one might be captivated by her beauty. But it's another thing for a husband to be enthralled by another woman. Thinking this, I replied,
No, we don't. You usually drink tea. Elizabeth, do you drink coffee?
I can, but... Elizabeth looked at Matthew after saying that. I like Elizabeth, but honestly, I don't like that gesture of hers. Because whenever Elizabeth does that, most men end up doing whatever she wants. As a special treat, why don't you go buy some for her?
Predictably, I sighed at those words. Elizabeth, looking a bit troubled, wouldn't say she'd settle for coffee. Reluctantly, I went to buy tea. After purchasing it at the nearest supermarket, I was walking back home when my mobile phone rang. It was Matthew.
Sorry, can you also pick up a cake on your way back? What? But
Matthew cut off the call without waiting for my reply. No matter how many times I called back, Matthew didn't answer. He must be too caught up in their conversation. With no choice, I stopped by the bakery before heading home.
I'm home.
Welcome back. When I entered the living room, the window was open. They were both in light clothing. Perhaps it was too warm. I thought they should just turn off the heating as I spoke up. Was it hot?
Yeah, it was.
You could have turned off the heating.
Yeah, that's right. Should have done that.
Matthew seemed somewhat flustered. There was nothing unusual in the living room, and Elizabeth was smiling at me. I felt something unpleasant but pretended not to notice and laid out the cake.
Here you go, Elizabeth.
Thank you. Elizabeth thanked me in a cheerful voice. Then, she chose a cake slice and began eating next to Matthew. Watching this irritated me. However, Elizabeth has always been a person who is close to others, so I thought it was pointless to say anything and tried not to think about it.
Hey Linda, Matthew is really wonderful, isn't he?
Do you think so? I replied bashfully to Elizabeth's comment. Then, with a beautiful smile, Elizabeth continued talking while resting her hand on Matthew's knee.
Yes. He's really handsome and above all, a banker, right? That's impressive.
Thank you. You're wonderful too, Elizabeth.
Oh, that makes me happy.
Matthew is a banker who had recently been promoted. When Elizabeth praised him for that, Matthew smiled very happily. Though there were supposed to be 3 of us, it quickly became just the 2 of them. Feeling out of place, I silently ate my cake and moved to the kitchen.
Matthew, can I come over again?
Yes, of course. Hey, Linda. Finally hearing my name, I looked up. That's when I noticed Elizabeth leaning against Matthew for the first time.
Is it okay to come over, but maybe keep a bit of distance? Are you jealous, Linda?
Don't be too clingy with Matthew, he's gonna run away.
That's not what I meant.
My response grew stern at Elizabeth's teasing, and Matthew frowned.
Linda, that's rude to Elizabeth who came all the way here. Apologize. What? Apologize.
Matthew had never raised his voice before. Surprised, I widened my eyes.
Matthew, it's okay. I'm not angry, right, Linda? We're best friends after all.
Sorry. Reluctantly apologizing, Elizabeth looked very pleased, and Matthew also looked at Elizabeth kindly beside her. Seeing this made me feel terrible. Elizabeth stayed for dinner that day and was glued to Matthew the entire time. And finally, she hugged Matthew before leaving.
Elizabeth is beautiful, isn't she? Did you enjoy flirting with my best friend? What, are you jealous? No.
After Elizabeth left, my stern expression made Matthew instantly sour.
What? It's not jealousy, but envy. Just because Elizabeth is beautiful, that's not good. That's not it. Stop it. I'm going to bed. Take care of cleaning up.
Saying that, Matthew immediately went to the bedroom. Left alone, I cleaned up while shedding tears. And from this day forward, Matthew's behavior started to become clearly strange.
I don't need dinner today. What? Again? Got a problem with that?
It's not that, but... Matthew began eating out about half of the week. He claimed he was busy with work, but judging by his cheerful demeanor, it seemed unlikely. I had a bad feeling but tried not to think about it too much.
Make sure to iron my shirts properly. Don't embarrass me.
Okay. From the day Elizabeth visited, Matthew began to treat me arrogantly. It was incredibly sad and very painful. I once asked Matthew why he was acting like that. But Matthew just glared at me and didn't take me seriously.
Don't worry about that and just hurry up with the housework.
That was all he said, without offering to help anymore. I would send off Matthew, who was eager to go out on days he didn't need dinner at home, with a heavy heart. After continuing this life for a month, Elizabeth suddenly came to our house on a holiday. Linda, I have something I want to talk about.
Elizabeth, I told you to wait, didn't I?
But I have to. The conversation unfolded at the entrance, and I realized my bad premonition had become reality. Since when? Matthew answered awkwardly, almost mumbling.
Since the day Elizabeth came over.
Hearing that, everything went dark before my eyes. Then Elizabeth spoke to me. I thought it was wrong because he's your husband. But I've fallen in love with Matthew. Matthew consoled Elizabeth, who was on the verge of tears. Honestly, I had a hunch this would happen since the first time I introduced them to each other. But I just looked the other way. Are you going to divorce me?
I'm sorry, but I've fallen in love with Elizabeth. I'll pay the alimony, so please don't ask her for it.
Matthew's words hit me like a blow to the head, igniting a surge of anger.
Why do you get to decide that? I'll demand compensation from both of you.
Fine. I'll pay for Elizabeth's share too.
Do as you please.
Screaming at the sight of my beloved defending his affair, Elizabeth trembled. Matthew hugged her protectively. I felt like I was going mad. After that, I quickly divorced Matthew, received compensation from both, and moved. Hearing rumors that they got married immediately, I started a new life while drowning in sorrow. Fortunately, I found a job quickly. As I got used to work, I found a new boyfriend and gradually stopped thinking about Matthew and Elizabeth. My new boyfriend, Joseph, was a very kind person. Joseph had a divorce history and 2 children. Despite being busy with work, he was fully committed to parenting, and I fell deeply in love with him. Joseph loved me with all his heart. He introduced me to his children early on, and they got along well with me. After dating for about 3 years, we got married. I received a lot of blessings from those around us, retired to support him, and became a housewife. I spent very happy days, without ever remembering Matthew and the others, enjoying a smooth-sailing married life. However, trouble can strike unexpectedly. One afternoon, I received a call from an unusual person. It was Elizabeth, my best friend who had stolen Matthew from me 10 years ago. Reluctantly, I decided to answer the phone. Then, Elizabeth, with hardly any greetings, dropped a bombshell.
I had twins. I need an $18,000 baby shower gift, please.
To think she dared ask that after stealing my happiness. Dark emotions welled up, but thanks to Joseph, who looked at me worriedly, I regained my senses. That's right. I have Joseph now. Elizabeth, who kept pressing for a response while I remained silent. I replied to her with a bright voice.
Sure. I'll come with my husband, the bank president. What?
I could hear Elizabeth's pathetic voice. I continued.
I've remarried. Why didn't you tell me? That's obvious, isn't it? I didn't want you to steal him too. We're best friends, aren't we?
Elizabeth screamed about being heartless, but I couldn't help laughing. And slowly, I replied to her words.
You were the one who betrayed first.
At that, Elizabeth was at a loss for words. I unilaterally ended the call and explained the situation to Joseph beside me. And so, I decided to go ahead with my plan for revenge. I discussed the plan with Joseph. Originally, I had forgotten about the plan I made right after the divorce because my relationship with Joseph was so joyful. But if they were going to bring it up again, that's a different story.
Go all out, that's fine.
Yeah. Thank you. I nodded in gratitude. Then, I simulated the reunion with Elizabeth set for the next week over and over. And on the promised day, I headed to the address Elizabeth had given me and rang the doorbell.
Welcome. Are you Linda's husband?
Yes, that's right.
I didn't know you got married again. You could have told me. That's rich coming from you, after what you did.
Elizabeth's face clouded over for a moment at my words, but she still kept her smile and ushered us inside. The interior of the house, larger than the one Matthew and I had lived in, was scattered with branded clothes and bags here and there. All of them women's, so they must belong to Elizabeth.
You still like branded things, huh?
Oh, yeah. But actually, I prefer more modest things, you know? Elizabeth answered, oddly directing her response to Joseph, although I was the one who asked. That reminded me of how she was with Matthew. And I felt an urge to shout right then. Joseph stopped me.
Elizabeth, Linda asked you the question, not me. I don't particularly want to know. I see.
Elizabeth's momentum was broken, and she looked foolish. Just seeing that made me feel better.
Thank you.
You're welcome, Joseph said with a smile, reassuring me he's my greatest ally. Then, entering the living room, we found Matthew lounging, who looked up in surprise at seeing me.
Linda, why are you here? Why? Because Elizabeth invited us. Huh? Elizabeth, why did you invite her?
Matthew looked confused and even more so when he saw who was behind me.
The president. Why with Linda? We're married. He's my husband. You got married again?
Matthew kept looking back and forth between me and Joseph, perplexed. Joseph's brows furrowed at Matthew's rude behavior.
Do you have a problem with my wife? No, not at all.
Matthew straightened up as he answered, looking pathetic. Elizabeth seemed to think the same, sighing dramatically. But that wasn't the end of it with Elizabeth.
Nice to meet you, Linda's husband. I'm Elizabeth, Linda's best friend.
Elizabeth leaned towards Joseph as she said this, but he avoided her. However, Elizabeth didn't give up.
You're handsome. What's your name? I have no intention of telling you.
That's cold. Come on, it's okay, right? Elizabeth reached out and touched his arm. In an instant, he knocked her hand away.
Ouch! What are you doing to my wife?
Matthew glared at Joseph in response to Elizabeth's small cry. Then, Joseph, looking utterly exasperated, turned to Matthew.
Your wife was the one who suddenly touched me. Yeah, but don't you feel sorry for Elizabeth? Not really. Rather, I think someone who's married yet touches other men so easily should reflect on their frivolity.
Elizabeth turned red with Joseph's words. Apparently very offended, she glared at Joseph. Then I spoke up. Elizabeth, trying to take someone else's man again, huh?
What?
Did you think I hadn't noticed? I pulled out a photo from my bag and scattered it around. The photo showed many men. Elizabeth's face turned pale at the sight.
What's this? These are photos of Elizabeth's ex-boyfriends.
Well, Elizabeth is beautiful, after all.
Yes, but that doesn't give her the right to repeatedly steal others' partners.
Matthew also turned pale, recognizing the situation, but then he picked up a photo as if something caught his eye.
Hey, is this a recent photo? Yes, that was just taken yesterday.
Upon hearing that, Matthew glared at Elizabeth and thrust the photo at her. The photo showed Elizabeth walking arm in arm with a young man.
Why do you have this? Hey! Weren't you supposed to be staying at your mom's house because she was sick yesterday?
Matthew raised his voice. Elizabeth tried to make excuses, but it was clear Matthew wasn't buying any of it.
We're getting a divorce. I'm done with you. Why does it have to come to this?
As the two began to argue, I intervened.
The conversation isn't over yet.
I showed them another photo, causing Matthew's face to turn pale.
What is this? This shows you, doesn't it?
Matthew frantically shook his head at Joseph's words. But the photo clearly captured Matthew's face. With incontrovertible evidence before him, Matthew slumped down, defeated.
Please, anything but dismissal. I can't just overlook someone who has embezzled money. But...
Indeed. Matthew had been skimming funds from the bank. We discovered this soon after starting our preparations. Joseph had hired a detective, and it came to light.
Matthew's department had been having frequent discrepancies in their accounts, and Joseph, hearing rumors of Matthew's lavish lifestyle, became suspicious. As a banker, not only did you hurt and discard my wife, but you also tarnished the bank's reputation. You're disqualified. I'm sorry, I just needed the money. I'll return it. If that were enough, we wouldn't need the police. At Joseph's words, Matthew fell to his knees, disheartened. Elizabeth looked down on Matthew as if he were trash. You said your salary had increased recently, but that was a lie. It's because you're always splurging on brand name goods. It's your fault for not bringing home a bigger salary as a banker. You're the worst. How dare you? You bitch! Matthew glared at Elizabeth, who seemed to think she was in a superior position and was unfazed by it. I handed Elizabeth a document. People in debt shouldn't be talking like that. Where did you get that? You didn't borrow from a reputable source, so the interest has ballooned. Tough times ahead for you. I said this to Elizabeth before making a call. After finishing the call, I turned back to Elizabeth. Elizabeth, you've always been popular, right? So what if I was? But did you know, behind your back, people actually disliked you? Elizabeth looked at me, not understanding. Indeed, Elizabeth had been quite unpopular during our school days. Despite her attractive appearance, which naturally made her popular with boys, her bad attitude and habit of stealing others' boyfriends made her resented by the girls. As I explained this, Elizabeth, seemingly unaware, trembled. You say you've been popular, but really, you were just disliked and kept at a distance. That's a lie. As proof, nobody invited you to their weddings. Elizabeth seemed to realize something at my words. I had thought of her as a friend and invited her to my wedding, thinking she wouldn't make a move on my partner. Elizabeth couldn't attend my wedding due to her circumstances, but if she had, I might have been criticized by my other friends. The thought made me shudder now. However, Elizabeth seemed too preoccupied to notice my reaction. That's a lie. I was popular and beautiful. Elizabeth muttered quietly, sounding frankly eerie. After a while, she looked at Joseph and tried to lean on him. Hey, Joseph, I'm beautiful, right? Joseph silently avoided her. Infuriated by his reaction, Elizabeth reached out and grabbed him. Why are you avoiding me? Because it was disgusting. Disgusting? Yes, you're like a witch. Elizabeth lost all composure and began to flail about, her hair flying. Seeing this, I thought Joseph's words were quite apt. Joseph continued firmly. My wife is more beautiful than you. I will never be swayed by you. More beautiful than me? Impossible. No, it's a fact. In terms of both beauty and purity of heart, my wife is the best. Tears welled up in my eyes at Joseph's words. However, Elizabeth was infuriated at being told I was more beautiful. More beautiful than me? Are you blind? If anyone is at fault here, it's your brain. What? Joseph continued to provoke her, and Elizabeth grew increasingly angry. As this back and forth went on, the doorbell rang. Seeing the visitor, Elizabeth turned deathly pale. No! No way! Well, then good luck with your debt repayment. I don't want to. As Elizabeth screamed, the front door opened, and intimidating figures entered. They took Elizabeth away, flanked by them, somewhat forcibly. Matthew watched, trembling, making no move to help his wife. Watching him, I realized how right I was to have divorced him back then. Thank you for falling for Elizabeth. It seems my thoughts showed on my face. Because Matthew glared at me. What's so funny? What? Nothing. Just thinking this is what self-inflicted means. If you hadn't been here, I could have been happy. No, that wouldn't happen. Both of you have too much debt. Unable to argue, Matthew gritted his teeth in frustration. I handed him a thick envelope with a smile. What's this? Congratulations on your baby. The $18,000 Elizabeth asked for. Aren't you going to show me the kids?
The kids are at my parents' today. $18,000.
Yeah, that means you want the compensation money back, right?
Indeed. The $18,000 was the exact amount of compensation Matthew and Elizabeth had paid me. With the debts piling up, Elizabeth probably intended to use it to pay off her debts. The reason she left the children at Matthew's parents was that she never intended to show us the kids in the first place. I then dropped another bombshell.
Well, it would be good if those kids really are yours. What do you mean?
Oh. Realizing what I meant, Matthew's face turned pale. If Elizabeth had been seeing her affair partner before getting pregnant, there was a high possibility he was the father. Matthew seemed to have realized this.
But Elizabeth said they look like me. She would say that, wouldn't she? To keep it hidden.
All your words could be lies too.
Huh? I'm not so idle to lie. If Elizabeth hadn't called me, I wouldn't have bothered with this ever again.
As I kept cutting off Matthew's words, his momentum faded. I pressed further by handing him a document.
What's this? Old test results.
Test results?
Yes. I had the hospital issue them again.
The documents I produced were from a gynecological examination Matthew had undergone while we were married. It was written there.
It said natural conception would be difficult, so when I heard about the twins, I remembered this.
Matthew was stunned looking at the test results. I had intended to tell him the results after the examination, but Elizabeth came over the day before I could.
Those kids aren't mine. It's highly likely. Why now? Is this revenge?
Matthew's obvious question was met with my smile. Then Joseph spoke up.
You're to be confined to your house from tomorrow. We'll send further notice. Don't expect to avoid dismissal. Please wait. Anything but dismissal.
Still pleading, even now. Joseph responded with a cold gaze. Before making a phone call. Hearing the name of the person on the phone, Matthew lost all color.
I've instructed them to thoroughly investigate you.
Matthew slumped down, pale, and whispered, "It's all over."
Yes, your career as a banker is over.
Not just as a banker, but with debts piling up, his life seemed over too. That must be something Matthew understood best. Lacking the energy to glare at me, Matthew began to apologize to Joseph, hands on the ground.
I'm truly sorry. Please, anything but dismissal. That's impossible, as I've said.
Bluntly rejected by Joseph, Matthew then turned to me. Is he that desperate to remain a banker? I was somewhat impressed. Matthew apologized to me while making a bold request.
Linda, I'm truly sorry. Can you forgive me now? Because you think if I forgive you, you'll escape dismissal? That's part of it.
Matthew's confirmation was met with my sigh. Then I stated clearly,
even if I forgive you, it won't erase the fact of embezzlement. Besides, my husband doesn't mix personal feelings with business. But
Matthew wore an expression of despair. Then, leaving behind Matthew, who became silent, Joseph and I left the scene. Later, I heard that Elizabeth sent over divorce papers. Matthew signed them and seemed to have given up custody too. The twins Elizabeth bore were indeed the children of the man she had an affair with, and I heard they became the talk of the bank. I received an apology from Matthew's parents. They had been distant during the marriage, but it seems they were just watching from afar. I heard Matthew is now holed up in his room at his parents' house. As Joseph declared, the bank fired him. Life seems to be very tough, with demands for the return of embezzled funds on top of debts. He is reportedly working multiple jobs day and night, surviving on sprouts every day to fend off hunger. He once came to visit in shabby clothes, but was stopped by security before he could even reach the entrance. I might be heartless for not feeling pity for Matthew's downfall. But, upon reflection, it seems only natural considering everything he did. Elizabeth's parents were acquaintances from before, so they were shocked when I told them the truth. It seems they didn't know she was meeting Matthew based on lies, nor that he was my ex-husband. They apologized many times, making me feel sorry. They offered to pay for the trouble caused, but I declined since Elizabeth's parents were not to blame. Elizabeth was taken away by debt collectors, and her whereabouts are unknown. Since a letter arrived from somewhere near the sea once, she might still be alive. The twins were being raised by Elizabeth's parents, but being elderly, they couldn't keep up and recently placed them in a facility. It might seem sad, but it's probably better than growing up beside Elizabeth. I've come to realize just how much I've come to dislike Elizabeth. Joseph is working hard as a bank president, and his work keeps him late. But he keeps in touch, so I'm not worried about infidelity at all. Meeting such a gentleman has made me happy, and thinking back, the difficult divorce seems like it was meant to bring me to him, which is strangely gratifying. He recently hired a new secretary and wants to host a home party. Watching him prepare the barbecue gear makes me feel very happy. Lately, I've been into taking day trips with the kids. It's mostly nearby, but it's refreshing and fun. Joseph wants to join, but he's too busy now, so I'm enjoying the time with just the three of us. The older one is already a teenager, but still calls me mom and shows affection. The younger one hugs me and says he loves me, making every day very happy. And now, a new life is growing inside me. Despite the high risk of being a first-time mother at 45, I want to carefully raise this precious life we've been blessed with. The kids are looking forward to having a much younger sibling, so we plan to decide on the baby's name as a family of 4.
We're not marrying her off if it's a girl. You're getting ahead of yourself.
Let's not find out the gender until the birth. We accepted Joseph's suggestion, so we still don't know whether we'll have a boy or a girl. Thanks to that, we spend every day imagining our future with either a son or a daughter. There were hard times, but my current happiness overwrites them, making me very happy now. I feel like the rest of my life will surely be bright. That's what I thought as I gently stroked my belly.